Mr. President, I come to the floor to speak about two of the votes that we'll be casting at approximately 5:30 this afternoon, and to explain why I'm going to vote, how I'm going to vote. On the first, the legislation regarding China's currency policy, I'm going to vote no, and I want to explain why. Managing our economic, military, and diplomatic relations with China is going to be one of the great challenges of this century. China is obviously a rising power today, though not one without problems, as I'll get to in a moment. But we have come to a point, China and the United States, where we not only interact and sometimes bump up against each other militarily, diplomatically, economically, but we've also in many ways become dependent on one another. What each of us does has an effect on the other, often a significant effect, and that's why I say that one of the great challenges of this century will be to manage our relations with China in a way that's certainly beneficial, protective to the United States, but hopefully to China from its perspective as well. I say this as background to what I want to say about China's currency policy. I'm troubled by China's currency policy. China has obviously kept its currency too low, it's undervalued, and that has resulted in products being made in China selling elsewhere at a price that's lower than other manufacturers can compete with, including American manufacturers that are directly in conflict with China. So we're right to be upset about that policy. Our government has been expressing its frustration, its anger to the Chinese government. We've been negotiating, cajoling. You must say in acknowledgement of reality that the Chinese have slowly allowed their currency to rise. Approximately 30% in value over the last 6 years, but it should be allowed to rise more. On the other hand, I do want to say in fairness that China's currency policy does have effects that are not all bad for everybody in the United States. The fact that its currency is undervalued means that some of the products it brings into our country sell at a lower cost. And that's obviously particularly important to middle-income, lower-income families who are out buying products that otherwise would cost more. So I understand this legislation to be an expression of anger at the Chinese government and an attempt to pressure the Chinese government to more rapidly allow its currency to rise. I would say, as I understand it, that the legislation before us is intended as a warning shot across China's bow, as it were. But China may, from its perspective, see this as an attempt to make a direct attack, a direct hit on its bow, and it may be tempted to retaliate economically. And of course, the worst result would be that we would end up in a mutually damaging trade war. In some sense, it's no surprise that we are considering legislation like this now. Though I think at any time we'd be concerned about China's currency policy. But during times of economic recession, such as the one we are in now, a recession that we're fighting to come out of, another recession that we worry we'll go into, over history, nations have repeatedly become protectionist in their economic and trade policies. But history also shows that most of the time, that protectionist policy makes the economic problems worse, not better. Today, I get back to what I said about China being a rising power, but not one without problems. China's economy, in its way, is also fragile. It's dealing with a real estate bubble, a bubble in real estate values that's growing. As the papers today indicate, its banks are losing their credibility. Inflation is rising. Unemployment is rising. So it would be foolish for China to get into a trade war with us in response to legislation like this. China, in fact, may be more vulnerable in a trade war than we are. But China's vulnerability economically today, I think, carries great risk for the United States and the world. If a trade war sends China's economy into a recession or worse, the resultant economic instability would seriously hamper prospects for the global economic recovery everybody hopes for. And of course, it would greatly dampen our hopes for an American economic recovery and creation of more jobs here at home. So bottom line, I think that the risks that this proposal will aggravate the current global and American economic problems, which concern us most, are greater than the rewards of again trying to force China to allow its currency to rise more rapidly. And that's why I will vote against the China currency legislation that comes before us later this afternoon. Mr. President, I also want to speak about the American Jobs Act, which will come before us for a cloture vote. We're obviously here in America, and it's related to what I've just talked about, going through what I think is the most difficult economic period in our history since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Unemployment hovers at around 9%. That translates into millions and millions of people out of work, millions more who are worried that they're going to be next to lose their jobs. Confidence in our future among the American people, among critical decision makers and businesses is at a real low. Confidence in our national government is low and falling. Anger at our rising national debt is high and rising. The American people are demanding that we do something, particularly to protect the jobs they have and create new jobs if they've already lost them. It is in that context that the President proposed the American Jobs Act, a series of interesting ideas aimed at creating jobs that will cost almost $500 billion. So, what am I going to do on this one? On this one, I'm going to vote against the filibuster of the American Jobs Act because I believe our country and our constituents need and deserve a debate here in this Senate on what each of us, all of us, think we should do to get our economy moving again. And it should be an open debate without effective limit on amendments, with many ideas being offered as to what we should do and hoping that that will lead us to some consensus. So I'm going to vote against the filibuster in the hope that we will bring about such a debate. But I must say that if cloture is granted and the filibuster is ended, I would seek to amend the American Jobs Act down to a very few of its constituent parts that I think are worth their cost. If a vote were called on the American Jobs Act as it is now, in other words, if the tree were filled and that's what happened, I would vote against the American Jobs Act, and I want to explain why. And the bottom line here is that I don't believe that the potential in this act for creating jobs justifies adding another $500 billion to our almost $15 trillion national debt. In fact, I think the most important thing we can do to improve our economy, reduce unemployment, create jobs, is to bring our national debt under control. And the best way to do that is to adopt a tough, comprehensive, balanced debt reduction plan like the one recommended by the bipartisan Simpson-Bowles Commission. The Budget Control Act, which we adopted over the summer to deal with the debt ceiling, created the so-called Super Committee, the Joint Special Committee. And that committee of 12 now gives us another chance to deal with our debt in a constructive and bipartisan way. We all know that that's not going to be easy. But the American Jobs Act would make the task of the Joint Special Committee even more difficult because it spends almost $500 billion that we don't have. $500 billion that the Act now proposes to raise with a surtax on people making more than $1 million a year. I don't have any objection to a tax increase of that kind. But if we use it for the American Jobs Act, it's not going to be there to be used by the Joint Special Committee as part of an overall bipartisan debt reduction plan. And we desperately need to have some sources of revenue along with spending cuts to adopt the kinds of reductions in our debt that the country's future urgently needs. Now let me come back to what I said a moment ago and try to explain briefly why I believe that these two great problems we have, our limping economy, our persistent level of high unemployment, and our national debt really come together, and really more explicitly why I believe that reducing our debt is actually the best thing we can do to create jobs. The jobs we need are going to come from the private sector. Government in our system economically never has created the jobs itself. It shouldn't. It can't anymore because we don't have the money to do so. The jobs always will come where most people have been employed in our country, and that's in the private sector. If you chart corporate investment on the same graph as job creation, you will see that the two lines follow each other almost exactly. This is a chart prepared by the Bureau of Economic Analysis at the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the federal government. And over the last 50 years, beginning in 1961, going to 2011, it charts two things. The gray line is investment in real equipment and software spending. And the purple line is private employment numbers. And this is, to me, when I saw this, I thought it was a stunning chart and really very compelling because you can see that corporate and private business investment is almost exactly along the same line. A little bit of a digression here, but because jobs fell more than investment, but investment was falling and jobs fell at the same time. For 50 years, this, I think, is probably the single most significant predictor of job growth in our country is business investment. So we've got to ask ourselves, how can we stimulate that kind of business investment today? Because that's what we need. We need these jobs. And I must say, regret to say, that I don't believe we can do it with the mix that's in the American Jobs Act. It seems to me like a kind of mini stimulus. The stimulus, $800 billion, that was adopted a few years ago, which I supported, I think made the economy better than it otherwise would have been. But it didn't give the economy what the president said he hoped it would give. We all hoped it would give, which was a jolt. And this American Jobs Act, which is a kind of mini stimulus that will cost $500 billion, is less likely, for obvious mathematical reasons, to give the economy the jolt. But it will cost $500 billion that we don't have, and we'll have to find somewhere to raise. To me, what we've got to do is restore confidence in people in the business sector to invest. That's what's missing today in our economy. They don't have confidence in our economic future. They don't have confidence in our government, us. They don't have confidence that we'll work together to reduce our debt, to create some predictability for them in the years ahead. And that's why I say that the best thing we can do to restore the confidence of the business community necessary for them to begin investing again, they've got the money, they're just not spending it because they're nervous about the future, is for us to come together, hopefully led by the Joint Special Committee, in a bipartisan debt reduction program. It's not this American Jobs Act. I know it's been put forward with good intentions, but I don't think it does the job we need it to do for America. And I know that will cost another $500 billion that we desperately need to reduce our debt, which will do the job that we needed to do to create new jobs for our fellow Americans. I thank the chair, and I yield the floor.